Hello there. It's the weekend before Warfare at Reading, and just in the nick of time I've managed to finish painting some more Vikings, because I'm taking part in the Saga tournament there, and I decided I wanted to play a Viking warband. I've already got a Viking warband, but I'm not terribly pleased with it. I picked the figures up at a bring and buy in Plymouth a couple of years ago, and they were old RAFM, I think you pronounce it, or RAFM figures, a little bit clumsy, and I painted them up, and I tended to use the warband to give to people who wanted to learn how to play the game, rather than play with it myself. But I've always fancied a Viking warband, and fairly recently a new company emerged called Saxon Miniatures. I'll put a link to their website at the bottom of this video, so they're really worth checking out. They're based somewhere in Suffolk, I believe, somewhere like Ipswich, and they have a sort of limited range at the minute. They do Vikings and Saxons, as well as an Arthurian range, and some figures for El Cid as well. So they're largely very suitable to Saga. And I've managed to get the Vikings painted up. In the main, there's still a couple of figures I haven't painted, but essentially they've got two packs at the moment. They're both priced at £22 each. If you buy 3 packs or more, you get a reduction, you get them for £20. And at the moment they've got a pack which they describe as Viking Herdman, which you would primarily want to use as the Hearthguard troop type in Saga. And then they do another pack called Viking Warlords, and they are all named characters, which is interesting because there's quite a lot of characters that are actually named as heroes in the Viking set of rules. For example, the chap that I'm now using as my warlord, this chap here, is Harold Hardrada. So he's perfectly fine to use as a sort of bog standard warlord, but you could also use him as the character Harold Hardrada, who you can put into either a Viking warband or a Byzantine warband, and he has different attributes depending on how you use him. So I took that figure out the pack and based him up as a warlord, but most of the other ones, although they're named, there's no way I think that Saga are ever going to get round to using all those various characters in their sort of rules. So for instance, you have characters like Ivor the Boneless and Svein Forkbeard and Harold Bluetooth and so on. But there's no point really in basing them all on larger bases because, as I say, you don't really want that many warlords. The packs usually have about 16 figures in them. There are 16 herdmen in the herdman pack, but there are only 15 characters in the warlord pack. So what I've done, as I say, is I've painted Harold Hardrada up as a warlord, and I've got 3 that I've put aside to use as warlord figures. So they're not painted at the moment, but they're going to be. I think that this guy here in particular is Ragnar Lodbrok. I think you can see him all right. He's going to make a really good hero, and there are rules for Ragnar Lodbrok in Saga, so I'm going to use that figure for him. And then there's another character, this guy here is basically a fairly old chap with a bald head and beard and chainmail armour, and his described as Broad Ear of Man, and again the Norse Gael Warband from Raven's Shadow do use a hero character called Broad Ear of Man. He's supposed to have a kind of magical chainmail armour. I think he's known as He Who the Sword Cannot Bite, or something like that. So I'm going to base him up as a warlord figure. But to be honest, I'm not so keen on his character. He's a little bit kind of static and boring. I really like the Saxon range, and most of the figures have got very dynamic poses, but unfortunately he's a little bit dull, I think. And then the third one that I've put aside to paint later is this guy here, who is Oleg of Novgorod. So he really is more suited to a Rus warband. So I didn't paint him up for two reasons. One is that he wouldn't really fit into this Viking warband that I've painted, but also he's going to make a brilliant Rus warlord when I get round to painting some Rus figures that I've got. So I put him aside for that, although Oleg of Novgorod isn't mentioned as a specific character in Saga, but he's going to do as a kind of generic warlord. So they're the three that I put aside, and as I say, I've used one that I painted already, and that leaves me with 11 heroes or characters. So I had to make that up to 12 to get a 3 points of Saga, if I'm going to use them as Hearthguard. So I took this character, which was a special kind of presentation gift. When I took part in the Cardiff Saga tournament in 2014, they gave away this figure. It came with the transfers. It's from Gripping Beast, but a one-off piece that you won't be able to purchase. But he makes an ideal standard bearer. He's from Gripping Beast, as I say, and he also came with Little Big Man Studio transfers, but unfortunately I completely screwed up the transfer, so I had to buy another one from Little Big Man Studio. So this isn't the standard that he came with. Unfortunately I spoilt that, but the shield transfer is the one that he came with. So he can be either used as a banner holder in the walls, or I can use him as the 12th figure in this group here, to make him up to make up the numbers, basically. So I've got far more than I need to take to warfare now, because I have got some other figures that I'm going to show you in a moment at the back here. There are 8 figures from Annie Norman's The Dice Bag Ladies range of female Vikings or shield maidens. So I painted those up, and I thought, although these 4 here are described as berserkers, I'm actually going to use them just as bog standard warriors. So I've got another 8 figures there, which is 1 point of figures, and I've got 6 berserker figures, so I only need 4, and they are Wargames Foundry that I already had painted for my previous warband. So I've got about 7 points worth, something like that there, so I can make up a 6-point warband from that. So basically I wanted to give you a look at these, but I wanted also to kind of give you my impressions of the Saga, not the Saga, the Saxon Miniatures range, because as I say, I'm really impressed by them. I think they're really nice figures, with a few reservations. I've got a few reservations, and they're ideal for the game of Saga. They're almost exactly a match for Gripping Beast in terms of size. I've used Little Big Man Studio transfers that are intended for Gripping Beast figures on them, and they fit perfectly well. Out of interest, Little Big Man Studios do have a a mention of Saxon Miniatures on their website, and they do intend to bring out some decals that are suitable for Saxon Miniatures, but they haven't got around to actually putting them on their website yet. But I think in the very near future they'll have some transfer specific for that. So the reservations that I have, the big one is that they don't come with spears, and it does say that on the website, but I just don't understand why manufacturers don't produce spears with their figures. It's a pain, really. They don't even produce them separately, so you have to source your spears from somewhere else. So I've got mine from Gripping Beast. I don't really like using the brass rods. I don't think they look terribly realistic. But there are a couple of manufacturers, Wargames Foundry and I think Gripping Beast as well, who several years ago decided not to supply their figures with spears, but at least they did have an alternative that you could purchase to add. But Saxon don't even do that. So that's a bit disappointing. It's just an obstacle you have to overcome. Especially with the character figures, I think it's a little bit odd to describe so many of them with different names when there can't really be any true knowledge of what particular people look like. A good example being Ivor the Boneless, who is this character here. Now I've kitted him out in exactly the way they have shown him on their website, and I say that because you'll notice immediately that he's left-handed. Now the hand, you can't, unfortunately I've covered it with a shield, but the hand, his right hand, is very difficult to drill out without disturbing the chainmail or the cloak that he's wearing. So although if you wanted to make him right-handed, it would be very difficult to fit a sword into that hand, because you'd have to drill a hole through the sort of clenched fist that was large enough to take the pommel of the sword. So the only alternative would be to give him a spear, but if you gave him a spear you would have to drill through that cloak. And so I'm not sure whether they, on their website, they have given him a sword in his left hand because they came across that problem, or because there is some record of Ivor the Boneless being left-handed. And the whole matter of why he was called Boneless, if you go to YouTube and search for him, you'll find some really interesting videos about Ivor the Boneless. There's one chap who made a really good 45-minute documentary describing how he believed that he had a congenital condition that made him very short and with very brittle, bendy bones, which left him with a great deal of problems. And that's kind of curious because it would make sense in terms of his name and some descriptions of him being carried into battle on a shield. But how someone with that kind of degree of disability could survive in a very kind of masculine warrior culture is anyone's guess, really. So, I mean, if you're watching the TV series on the History Channel called Vikings, the character Ivor the Boneless has just been born at the end of episode 2, and he's shown with a kind of deformed leg, but not much else. So how they're going to develop his character, I don't know. But two other possibilities are, one, that Boneless was a kind of ironic nickname, and in fact he was extremely tall, and there has been a skeleton excavated in Repton, which is possibly his skeleton, which was reputedly about 9 foot tall. So he might have been a giant, and the name was a kind of a sort of joke name. And the other possibility is that it referred to his impotence, and that again, doubtful. I would have thought you wouldn't have got away with describing mocking someone's impotence in the Viking Age for too long, so I don't think the name would have stuck. So I think it would have been interesting if they'd produced a figure of the character sat on a shield, maybe with some people carrying him. That would have made an interesting character. But the point I'm trying to make is that they've given all these different figures names, but really they're generic Hearthguard, and you can use them as such. And I think they're brilliant. They're brilliant figures. But I've based them all on smaller bases, and I intend to use these as my Hearthguard and their herdmen as my warriors. So in a moment I'll take you around the warband and give you a closer look at them. Okay, so in the centre there I've got my warlord, which I could also use as the specific character Harold Hardrada, and next to him I've got my banner holder, which was a freebie from Gripping Beast when I attended the Saga tournament in Cardiff in 2014, and he can either be used specifically as a banner holder or as an additional Hearthguard. And then I've got 11 figures here, which are from the Saxon Miniatures Viking Warlords collection. They're all named characters, but I'm just going to use them as generic Hearthguard. So basically they have nearly all got cloaks, so that's how I'm going to tell that they're Hearthguard, or let my opponent distinguish them from my warriors. And the warriors I'm going to use are these 16 figures here, which again are all Saxon miniatures, and they're from their Herdman collection. So 16 figures is 2 points of warriors, so I've got about 5 points in total from Saxon. And then at the back here, slightly redundant now, is my Gripping Beast warlord that I use with my old warband, but I like that figure, so I've kept him on display. And then these are Annie Norman's 8 Shield Maidens. So those 4 figures there are resin figures. The one on the left there is clearly, if you've been watching the Viking series, clearly modelled on Lathgertha, and she's actually named as such. But these 4 figures here are just described as Shield Maiden Berserkers, and in fact you can see one of them there with the green and red shield is actually biting on her shield. But I've got some Berserkers already, and you're only allowed 1 unit in Saga, so I'm just going to put those together with the other 4 figures and make them another unit of 8 warriors. These are my Berserkers, and those who know the Saga rules will immediately notice that there are 6 figures there, so I'm only going to be able to use 4 of them, because 4 points of 4 figures in of Hearthguard is 1 point, so I've got more than enough figures to use as Berserkers there, and they're all from Wargames Foundry. I particularly like the one in the front of the middle there, so he's definitely going to be in my warband, but I'll just pick from the other 5 and make up a unit of 4. So there we are. I've kind of partly decided to take Vikings to Reading because they're much easier to transport. It's a nice compact warband, easy to carry around. There's no cavalry in it. Interestingly, the tournament rules are going to stick with the older fashion from the Dark Ages, and they're not going to be incorporating this rule about mounted figures gaining fatigue if they go into uneven terrain, which sort of demonstrates to my mind that I'm not the only one who doesn't think there's a good reason for that rule. And they're not including Crescent and Cross factions in the tournament, so it is very much Dark Age themed. And the Vikings are also very straightforward, simple warband to play with. But I don't believe I've ever noticed them winning a tournament. There's a guy called Andy Lyons who won the UK Grand Melee this year, and has won quite a lot of tournaments, including the one I staged in Plymouth. And he's going to be at this tournament, so he's a pretty clear favourite to win the tournament. And he's got an Irish faction that he plays with. And I did play one game against him in Plymouth in February. Played really badly and stupidly, but even if I'd played well, he would have beaten me hands down anyway. I think I was using Normans against him. So I've gone for something simple, and we'll see how he get on with it. I may even make a brief video of the show, although I think it's unfair to photograph and film games you play in a tournament, so it'll probably be my reflections between the games rather than disturbing my opponent by making a film like this. But anyway, there we go. Hope you enjoyed watching this, and I'll put up some individual stills of the figures as well, with a kind of musical background for you to watch after this. So thanks for watching, and see you on the next video.